Traveler, let's just dive right into this, shall we? Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to be exploring a deeply unsettling, yet honestly completely fascinating grim dark fable. We're kind of adopting the eerie, deliberate pacing of an ancient storyteller today to unpack the terrifying mythos of a being known as the Sylvan King. We're going to look at the world through his ancient, unblinking eyes. And in doing so, we'll unpack this wild philosophical concept known as the mandatory synthesis. So brace yourself, because this explainer is absolutely going to systematically challenge everything you think you know about your place in the natural world.
To really understand the king, we've got to understand his environment first. Picture this. You're standing deep within a subterranean vault. You're completely surrounded by these towering entities of stone and wood. And the only sound? The dry papyrus rustle of 1,000 dying summers. It's intense, right? I want to draw your attention straight to that atmospheric dread of the king's domain. Like, this isn't some bright, sunny, Disney-style forest. No, it's a heavy, silent, incredibly ancient place. And it sets the perfect stage for a journey that is going to systematically deconstruct the human ego. Just the sheer presence of the king demands that we strip away all our cozy modern comforts and face the raw, unyielding reality of the earth.
Which actually brings us to a frankly terrifying question. What if the nature we seek out for comfort doesn't actually want to soothe us, but unmake us? To get into this, we're going to frame our cosmic destiny through a Fichtean dialogue, basically a clash between our human thesis and the forest's antithesis, which eventually leads to this unavoidable synthesis. You know, our normal everyday human expectation is that nature is a sanctuary, right? Like a place to unwind. But this question completely shatters that naive belief. It pulls us straight into the very unsettling realization that the forest might actually have an entirely different agenda for us, one that, well, completely ignores our desire to be comforted.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is how the Sylvan King actually weaponizes philology, the study of language and words. The king looks at the word humanity. Now, we usually associate it with these lofty connotations, right? Civilization, art, kindness, all that good stuff. But the king, he strips all of that away, reducing it straight down to its Latin root, humus, soil, dirt. The source material illustrates this beautifully with the parable of the true name. It tells the story of a dying scholar who spent 90 years writing these incredibly heavy books on logic, convinced he had completely mastered humanitas. But on his deathbed, the king whispers to him that his 90 years of logic were, well, just a temporary mask worn by dirt. The scholar's true cosmic destiny was always just to return to the quiet stillness of the earth.
So that brings us to the king's diagnosis of our modern condition. From the perspective of the forest, our human thesis, this desperate belief we have in the individual, is literally an absolute illusion. Our whole pursuit of modern progress, our giant cities, our tech, the king sees all of it merely as a tragic, frantic panic for autonomy. It's just a desperate attempt to escape the inevitability of our own decay. We think we're thriving, but in his eyes, we're actually just hyper-connected, starving ghosts drifting through an artificial reality. The king views individual identity as this profound source of panic. He thinks we suffer from a deep biological loneliness, trapped in this constant, exhausting friction of existence that just constantly grates against the slow, silent language of rings and roots.
The tragic irony of the human ego is so brilliantly illustrated through two of the king's parables here. First up, we have the parable of the iron spire. So this builder tries to literally touch the sun with cold iron, and he calls it progress. But the higher he goes, the more isolated he becomes, completely forgetting his feet are made of the exact same humus that feeds the worms below. Then we have the parable of the separate drop. Imagine a single raindrop that desperately fears the collective stream, just clinging on to its autonomous identity. It spends its brief little life, trembling on a leaf, a starving ghost, until the sun just withers it into nothingness. Both are just these tragic, agonizing attempts to fight the inevitable.
Just think about that separate drop of water for a second. Had it just surrendered its heavy, exhausting selfhood to the roots, it would have lived forever as the sap of the oak. The takeaway here is absolutely profound. Holding on to your individual identity is actually a burden, not a triumph. It's the effort it takes to remain separate that's actually starving you. To the king, human upward growth as an individual is just a temporary, painful illusion. It's something that actively cuts us off from true permanence. And here's where we find the antithesis to our human illusion. The forest exists only to unmake them,
The spirits living in the lichen and the stone, they watch humans come to the forest seeking a retreat. They watch us try to, find ourselves among the trees. But to the Sylvan King, this is a fatal misunderstanding. The forest is not a spa for the soul. The forces of nature do not exist to validate your individual identity. No, they exist to break it down, to compost it, and to completely unmake the artificial boundaries you've constructed around yourself.
We see this clash play out perfectly in the parable of the gentle mother. A wanderer flees the iron cage of the city, finds this soft meadow, and just weeps with relief, believing nature is this gentle, neutral mother there to soothe his fragile ego. But contrast that with the king's reality. He's watching from the shadows, but not as a mother. He's an unblinking inquisitor, an architect of synthesis. He possesses absolute sovereignty, a power so complete and cosmic that it doesn't even require fire or steel. To the king, the wanderer isn't a guest at all. He is literal biological property, just waiting to be reclaimed by the soil.
So, how does this reclamation actually happen? Let me walk you through this rather terrifying procedure, which the king calls the mandatory synthesis. Step 1 is the unmaking, entirely stripping away that illusion of the individual we were just talking about. Step 2 is the stitching. Remember when that wanderer lay down in the meadow? Well, the grass wasn't a bed, it was literally the first thread of the stitching, physically binding his flesh back to the forest. And finally, step 3 is the harmony. It's the resolution of all our frantic, noisy human existence back into the quiet, heavy silence of the dirt. And the crazy part, this isn't framed as an act of cruelty. It's framed as a literal, inescapable return to the roots we try so frantically to outgrow.
I really want to emphasize how the king views this whole process. To him, it is simply the sickness of the individual finally meeting its cure. What we perceive as a terrifying end, the king's unblinking assessment views as just a long overdue debt being settled. The fear we feel, it's just a symptom of our sickness, the sickness of believing we're somehow separate from the earth. The inevitable synthesis of flesh and forest is simply the cure being applied. It's just the natural state of the humus reclaiming itself.
So, as the wood prince's cold gaze falls upon you, the traveler, and as the subtle stitching of the grass begins to take hold of your form, we arrive at this ultimate question regarding your cosmic destiny. Is the king stitching a cruel trap? Like, are you being murdered by some malicious entity? Or is there something way deeper happening here? It's the kind of question that forces us to look right past our own frantic survival instinct and gaze directly at the grand, silent machinery of the natural world.
And here is the answer, at least according to the spirits of the lichen and the stone. No. It is the highest philosophical mercy. I want to leave you with this final, chilling realization. By erasing the friction of existence, by trading your exhausting selfhood for a beautiful, permanent dream as the sap of the oak, the king is actually granting peace. Becoming the reality of the forest floor is the only true cessation of our species' endless, starving panic. In the end, there is no traveler, and there is no king. There's only the synthesis, the heavy silence, and the dirt. And with that thought, I have to ask you, the next time you step into the quiet woods to find yourself, are you truly prepared for what might find you instead?